Hello and welcome to another episode of Educational. I'm Roy.
I'm Terry.
Of course, we are the podcast we're chronicling not only our journey through aging, but we also have aging parents that we help as well. And so we always have new challenges. And so that's the basis of our show. But we also have professionals in different areas that come on, give us some advice to help us live our best life. And kind of one of our newer thoughts is that we definitely don't want to outlive our wellness. So that's important to a lot of us. But Terry, I'm going to let you introduce our guest for today.
Yeah, Gregory Ann Cox, who goes by Greg, is a podcaster. She has a podcast named Rebellious Wellness Over 50, and she has a book called it's referred to as the Missing Midlife Manual. Your genes do not determine the size of your genes. And Greg, welcome to our podcast. We're so excited to talk to you. You have a lot.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Oh my gosh. And I still snicker. She reads the title of the book before the show.
Yes, sorry.
Your genes do not have to determine your genes. I love that.
That's awesome. Greg, how did you get to where you are now? How did you come up with writing the book, and how long has your podcast been going on? We have so many questions.
So many questions. I'll try and give you so many good answers.
I know you will.
Let's start with the podcast. So the podcast is new the beginning of this year, 2021. It's something, I started another one a year or two ago, and it was a nation idea. I wasn't ready it was a spirituality podcast, and it was like so personal and raw that I was doing interviews and I wasn't really feeling it. But health is something that I'm committed to, helping people get new information, open their eyes, open their mind a little to what's different. And that brings us to the book, really. The idea that your genes don't determine the size of your genes was an outcome of my studying epigenetics. I got fascinated because, again, I was in the world of personal development. I've spent a lot of time in that. I've been a coach for 18 years. You get to meet, if you're interested, or hear about at least, lots of these spiritual people who were scientists first, right? Blending science of mind and body together. And Bruce Lipton is the first person I ever heard talk about epigenetics, which means epi means around, right? The environment around the cells and how much influence it has. And I was coaching women through perimenopause and menopause. I was going through it myself. And there are so many myths out there, especially about as you age, you're going to get fat. It's just the way it is. Or if you're in a family that has diabetes or obesity or this, you are probably going to end up that way too. And that was making me crazy and sad at the same time, because I found out that it's not true. And genes do determine some part of our physiology, but certainly not all of it. And so the book is 10 chapters where I take one myth at a time, like fat makes you fat, or your genes determine the size of your genes, or, so just to help women see that they have other options than just buying into this negativity or buying into the calories in, calories out, you're not working out hard enough, all of these things that we constantly get told, which is really shaming people who can't seem to change the bodies they have. And I'm not about changing the body, right? The physiology, the shape of the body, or the intention of the body, just to have people be as healthy as they could be within the body they were given.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's it's an important part, I think, that we have kind of uncovered as we've gone through this journey, is that our bodies do, I guess our genes, our bodies do have a determination. We're not all equal. Everything doesn't work the same for everybody. And
Absolutely.
then, of course, I hate to say it, but the older we get, the more struggles that we have for so many different reasons. And I guess that's one thing to talk about, if for just a minute, is some of those struggles that we face once we get over 40, once we get over 50, once we get to 60, it seems like they start mounting and mounting and mounting.
It's true that the body does change. And we think of things generally 40s, 50s, we start noticing incrementally that, whatever, we feel fatigue, I don't have the energy I used to, I'm putting on weight I can't control. But technically things really start changing in our 30s. But we have so many good things still in place that we don't notice the little things. And it's true that the metabolism does slow down as we age, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. And it does, we just have to adjust. And sometimes a person who had a lifelong successful eating pattern of, let's just say, a low fat, high carb, or, maybe low carb, high fat, all of a sudden things could change, and that could no longer feel good, or it might not give them the results. So one of the things that's woo and crazy to talk about, but it's really important, is to listen to our bodies as we age. And, there was a comedian when somebody would say, like, well, it hurts when I do this. He's like, well, don't do that anymore. Right. So our body is constantly giving us clues. If we get heartburn after we eat something, maybe instead of reaching for the Prilosec, we should see if we can substitute something as enjoyable, because I'm all about delicious and enjoyment and no deprivation.
Right.
But there are clues along the way. But yes, there are going to be struggles, and things are not going to work as we want them to, as when we were in our 30s and 40s. But it doesn't mean we can't have a great life and enjoy it and have vibrancy and health.
And that's a good point. I mean, we're just so used to, so conditioned to throw medication at, oh, this is happening. Oh, let's just do this. Let's get some Pepto-Bismol. Oh, let's just get whatever we need.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we're going through can be handled through foods that we eat, or, supplements that we need, things like that.
Yeah, and
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
It's
Yeah,
like,
We froze.
no, I was just going to say that it's important, because the the root cause of a lot of this, and I'll speak for myself, is that I have something, and I think I mostly traced it back to really sugary substances and maybe even some carbs, is kind of a food allergy. So in the morning when I wake up, I don't get to do this much anymore, but let's just say, you go to the local Mexican restaurant and have some chips and a margarita, something about that, the next day, my eyes are so puffy, and I am very clogged up. It's like a sinus or an allergy, and it takes me, a good half of a day just to get out from under that. And so again, I've pretty much quit that, because it's gotten used to it. It had to be more, maybe a couple margaritas and, sitting around eating the chips all night. And then now it's gotten to the point that if we go up and just split a bowl of chips and have one, I'm still done with that.
yeah. Yeah. It is interesting how and that does have a little bit to do with youthful metabolisms versus, the ones that are kind of just chugging along. But my husband and I joke all the time. It's like, because who's been to a restaurant in a really long time? We haven't. But we take out, and do you want to get Chinese or Mexican? Same thing. It's like, oh, but how are we going to feel tomorrow?
Exactly.
Just because we used to be able to pound it, and we just can't. So we either order differently or order lighter, or we just say, all right, tomorrow I might be puffy, but tonight I'm going to enjoy this with my friends, like that kind of thing. I always say excess and moderation.
Exactly. So let's talk about sleep for a minute. Again, that's something else that I can relate back to myself, that sleep tends to be, or lack of sleep tends to be, the beginning of bad times for me, because I seem to want to eat more to try to boost that energy level up. And so I everybody's different, but there's this, I think there's a myth that as we age, we don't need as much sleep, but I personally feel like I need as much, if not more, sleep than what I've ever needed in the past.
That's absolutely right. You do need as much sleep as you ever have, and some people do need more. Daniel Levitin's book, which I'm still getting through, called Successful Aging, the chapter I just read was about sleep and how important it is, and how we have made it okay to not sleep well as we age. Therefore, people don't take the steps because they don't think it's going to change anything. But to your point about, you feel like you crave more sugar and things the next day, you do. When you're low on, the brain goes in search of energy when you're tired. And the fastest energy to get into the brain is something that turns into sugar or pure sugar. Right. Way back in the days when we thought that low fat was a good idea, I was working for a heart surgeon and I got interviewed on a radio. I also had a column with another woman in a magazine. And we did an article titled Jelly Beans for Breakfast. And it was because we said, everybody's rushing off to work. It was a book, it was a magazine for salespeople. people run out the door for work, they don't eat anything, they drink their coffee. What should you have in the morning? Or like, at least you could have a handful of jelly beans or a couple of chocolate kisses. And that, everybody was like, oh my God, that's really bad. Well, now I would never say that, but the science at the time said, because the brain, you really need to get something in there. And to help you with that, Roy, I would suggest that you increase your fat intake, because fat will help you sleep, fat will help your sex hormones, fat will help pretty much everything, and help balance out, quelch those cravings for the sugary, carby foods, because the brain can also run on fat. You just have to condition it.
Exactly. And that's something I've learned over the last few years is we've had a change in thinking, I guess, that, it was like carbs was what ran our brains and we got to have it. But there's also a lot of scientific evidence out there that the brain will adapt to run off of the fat if that's what we put in, which kind of brings up a question. I know this is a little bit off topic, but so I've read some studies as well that kind of link back to that let me see, get this right, the low fat phase of the 70s coming into the 80s. And they're trying to link that with the increasing amount of Alzheimer's we see in people, who were, I guess, in their 20s and 30s at that age and having that now.
Yeah, I don't know exactly the study or studies that you're talking about, but I interviewed America's #1 female brain doc a couple weeks ago. It's not out yet. It'll be out in April, but I asked her specifically about the relationship between sugar, carbs, and what some scientists are calling diabetes type 3, Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And she said that she said we are in the early days of enough science backing that theory, but it is lots and lots of papers are being written more and more. Retroactive studies, because we can't study that going forward. We don't want to cause Alzheimer's, but so there is definitely some credence to it. We just don't have a scientific, I can't quote something for your listeners to research right now.
No, and that's one thing we have tried to be careful with is, trying to add back fat. I think, of course, I want to make that disclaimer. We're not doctors. We don't claim to seek out medical professional help and all that. But, the one thing I try to struggle with is that some of those fats are high caloric. And so, and this is something else we've talked a lot more about lately is trying to balance everything. You want to increase that fat, but you got to watch your calories. That's why you really need a plan. It's hard to do this on the fly. If you sit down and plan out your meals, I guess you can speak to that. That's probably good advice for everybody, but we need to really be conscious of what we're putting in and not swing from extremes, because the other thing that we've done is utilize a nutritional tracker. And so even when we have thought we've been eating right at certain times, you're really deficient in a lot of these micronutrients that your body needs. So important to just be very conscious of these changes and what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And I will tie back to the idea that calories in does not equal calories out. So when you talk about the calories in fat, they affect the body in a much different way. And if the body, then let's say if I had a whole piece of whole grain toast with a piece of turkey on it and some cheese versus a bagel with like that tub of cream cheese kind of thing, they may have the same amount of calories, but the one with the turkey also has protein. The turkey and the cheese has protein, has the whole grains. It's going to slow down the way the sugar enters the body from the carbohydrates. So yes, awareness of the calories that we're eating is really important, but I don't like people to get hung up where they feel like, I got to track this. I just had a half an apple. Was that 40? I'm going to eat it. When people, especially people that have had, speaking from experience, food disordered eating patterns as young people, pushing or asking somebody to go back to the, controlling everything they eat can be worse for some people. Yeah. So it may not be your issue at all. And good for you that you're tracking, and especially tracking the nutritional value of the foods we eat.
Yeah.
So very important. Just to say that I don't like people to feel like they have to count all their calories and all their grams of fat. But for some people, that's the only way that they really maintain their healthy weight.
So let's talk about another kind of a hot topic that's out there now is leaky gut, and maybe I think the effects of dairy or oh,
Gluten.
Gluten.
Yeah, the gluten on that. So does that change as we age, or is there more effect on us as we get older?
Again, the body can change. We can develop sensitivities to things that we never had.
Yeah.
The gluten, one of the problems with gluten is that over the past 5 decades, maybe 4 or 5 decades, the wheat that we grow is different than the heirloom, if you want to call it that, wheat that was grown. Those grains that were grown probably up until the mid 50s had a different composition, more protein, and other things in them that we've stripped out so that we get faster crops growing. The bread that's made now, the crackers, the cookies, things like that, use this newer form of wheat, from what I understand, is what's leading to so much of this gluten sensitivity. Something's missing or something was added, I don't know which, but that's one of the reasons. Again, the body can change. And a lot of people, unless you get tested for a gluten sensitivity, which is a antibody test, you may not feel good when you eat gluten. That's a good enough reason not to eat it. But when people say, I can't have gluten, I ate a bagel and I got bloated, doesn't mean that they're gluten intolerant. And so they may wipe out all the things they used to love. Again, it's this whole thing about all or nothing.
Right.
But when people have leaky gut, which is evident by, gas, bloating, diarrhea, all kinds of things, symptoms. But again, that's something to get tested for, because it's a very serious condition for the body. The body poisons are going where they shouldn't. That's the leaky part. Things are leaking out into our system, causing inflammation. And we know that inflammation is like the devil when it comes to healthy aging.
Wow. Yeah. And I can't even tell you how many times in the last month that, inflammation is really gotten to be the thing that, well, from my understanding, I'll let you confirm this. It's kind of the genesis of a lot of things, the cancers, the arthritises, just probably a whole host of other things as well.
Yeah, most of the docs that I've interviewed will say that it is a catch-22 chicken and egg. Like, is inflammation causing the problem, or are the problems there and we didn't notice them until the inflammation became evident?
Okay.
So all of that to say, though, if we can keep the inflammation in our bodies low, we have a less likely chance of experiencing them. So does that mean it's causative? I don't know, but they are definitely related. And eating is one way, easy way to keep the inflammation low in our body.
Okay.
So one of the catchphrases on your website was everything is food, or that's your core belief.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. If you think about ingesting, we ingest food, right? We eat, we munch, we chew, we swallow. We also, our language is riddled with metaphors of food. My husband is a sweetie. We might say that he's like a bad apple. And so I could go on and on. We use the idea of food as emotional, to make an emotional connection, to tell a story, to describe our feelings. So I believe that everything is food in the way that every thought we think feeds our body well or ill. Because I know that you both have had an experience where somebody absentmindedly or directly flung an insult your way or challenged you, and it hurts, right? But there's nothing we ate. We thought about it. We experienced it in our energy body. And so I say that every thought we think and every bite we take either contributes to our wellness or our ill health. So all the media that we consume, the people in our lives, and there's one really easy exercise to do to have this experience, have the outcome be better for people, is to just look at their lives. Take 10 minutes, sit there, close your eyes if you need to, and just think about all the people in your life. Think about the room you're sitting in. Is there anything, like somebody may sit down on a chair at their desk and say, every single day they sit down, they say, I hate this chair. My back doesn't feel good. One of these days, but they don't get in a chair. And all of that, right, is just, I say, look at your life and what isn't serving you if you possibly can. Now, most people can't move just because they don't like their house. But whatever we can do to take away the the noise in our lives or the people that are creating stress in our bodies. That's what I mean by everything is food. Everything is creating the same thing that food does in our body.
Oh,
Yeah, and that's a good thing to point out because we talk about it a lot in businesses, to be successful, surround yourself with successful
Yeah.
people, but I think it goes for our happiness and for our
yes.
positivity. If we surround ourselves with positive, happy people, we will tend to be that way. Whereas and maybe even if we have negative people in our life, it's not, maybe it won't turn us negative, but it's just such a mental drain and a
Yeah.
psychological drain on our body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can
So,
we talk about some of the other myths that you dispel in your book?
We can talk about some of the other myths. What are some of the, okay, one of the myths is, I have a book if you want me to get it, is this is what happens at your age. The myth that at a certain age, whatever happens, we could stub our toe and go to the doctor and they'd say, see, this is what happens at your age. You're not as balanced as you used to be. You
Right.
aren't as aware. Your peripheral vision is going. There are a host of things attached to the age that somebody is by usually the Western medical model and probably our friends and relatives every once in a while,
Yeah.
like, oh, I need new glasses. Well, see, that's going to happen at your age. You just turned 60, whatever it is.
I just
And
want
yeah,
there isn't one age. If anybody listening can point to an age for every single human on the planet that a certain thing occurs, I'd say they could be a rich person
right.
because it's not true. We can't predict when things are going to happen. And we all know vibrant, amazing people in their 80s and 90s and people in their 50s and 60s that are living a very, very less than life. Not a judgment, just to say they may have a disability, they may have depression, they may, right? So that makes me nutty, but it's not true.
Okay.
right. Yeah, and I just wonder if you've looked at the genetics of the people that are doing better, um, living into, they're doing better at older ages. Is that a product of their environment? Is it a combination? And I realize if you have a severe disability, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm
Right.
talking about just like the more, uh, just the more normal person that is older looking, older feeling, run down. Is that because of because what they fed themselves, not necessarily food, but that, what we're talking about with the positivity? Do we see that probably the more positive people have aged and have better wellness?
Yes, and I will point you to the twin studies that are so popular in psychology magazines, and whenever we want to prove or disprove genetic, what do they call it? Nurture versus nature.
Mhm.
One of the stories I tell in the book is about a set of two women, twins, who were separated at birth. Maybe they were two or three, but they didn't spend much time together, just a couple of years. And they found them, they found each other, they enrolled in a twin study, and they found exactly the same age, exactly the same gene pool. One woman was out there racing around at 67 or 8 whenever they were talking to them, super vibrant, very, very happy. The other woman could barely get out of her chair. She was very despondent. She was a very negative creature. So then they would have to look at the parents in the situations that they both grew up in. And I don't think they had all of those information, or at least the study I read didn't give you all of that detail, but just a simple way of answering your question. I don't think it's just genetics that determines how we age. Mindset is such a strong part of all the work I do. You guys, we talked about it before we had this podcast together. It's you have to have a desire to look forward to something in front of you and then figure out how you're going to make that happen. I'm not talking about, maybe it's starting a business, maybe it's not, maybe it's just like, I want to be here next spring to see those daffodils again.
Yeah, and talking about things that happen at certain ages is that, I think there's a common myth or perception that, as we age, it's like you hit 60 and it's like, well, are you just sitting out on the front porch in the rocker? And it's like, well, hate to admit that I'm getting very close to that, but it's like I don't feel like it has slowed me down. Well, it slowed me down a little bit, just because of my, just for movement purposes. But as far as wanting to achieve things, still having a lot of goals. I mean, it's something that me and Terry talk about every day. We have a big list on one of our whiteboards of all the things, the short-term things we need to accomplish today, but these long-term objectives that, I guess, growing up, it was like when you hit 65, it was like you were living on borrowed time. But now, probably not only now we've evolved, over the last 40 or 50 years, but also because I'm at that age when it seemed like when you get to that age, it's like, yeah, things look a lot different to you. But, I truly expect to be very active into my mid 80s or 90s. I don't think there's any reason, unless I have a physical health issue that comes up, but there should be no reason why we can't be productive, accomplished, and still have those desires way late into life.
Oh, I totally agree. I agree. And even if we don't move as fast, even if we have a major setback that takes our wind out, our energy away from us, we can still have an enjoyable life. We just, again, it's that we started this conversation by talking about paying attention to the body and, adjusting as we age. That's, I think, one of the keys. When I recently did a survey of people over 50, between 50 and 90, and I asked, there was like 5 answers, but how do you view aging? What are you going to do? I'm great. I'm very happy. Right. And a lot of people said, I don't like it, but I'm going to make the best of it. And I thought that was encouraging, that the bulk of the people that answered didn't say, I hate it, I'm fighting it. They just said, I'm going to do what I can to make the best of it.
Yeah, because you can't change it. I mean,
and it's better than the alternative. Hello.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And it's funny you bring that up. We just did a little short piece yesterday. We haven't aired it yet, but there's some studies that I didn't actually read the study. I read, it was an article written on the study through the New York Times that older people have fared better through the pandemic. They said that, of course, in the beginning, there was a lot of ageism because it tended to hit older people harder and worse. But now that we've made it through this year, they were saying that we have fared better, which I thought was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did read that article as well. And it's also true for, what was it, accident. Like if somebody is in an accident and they lose an arm, or if they've had a stroke and they lose mobility or one side, the older the person is, generally speaking, the more able they are to sort of segue into something that looks like their life did before. Even young people, that's true of. I mean, there are exceptional people that just have that resiliency, but there's something about the brain, again, that we don't react to things like we used to in, with stress and anger and craziness. When things bad happen, we have wisdom to know that, I've had something like this before. I'll get through this too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they were saying, is that, some of us have lived through the gas crisis of the 70s, the financial crisis that we have. There's all these things that we are fairly confident that we will come out on the other end. The other thing that we were talking a little bit about too is, though, we don't have kids and a family. It's just us, and we're survivors. Where, I can only imagine if you were a young family with little kids, that just, kind of mounts that. So we'll say that.
Just worrying about all of them and how they're going to handle it and how you're going to take care of them. All of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some things that we can do? What are some things that we can listen to our body, of course, but are there, are there tests that we should be doing? I guess seeking out blood tests to see, how this is doing versus how that is doing, so that we may know where we need to make adjustments.
That's a great question. And I actually I have a report on the tests you need and the tests you don't and what they mean when you get them.
Okay.
Which I can send to you if you wanted to share it with your listeners. But to answer your question here, I think it's really important for everybody, no matter what age you are, probably over 40, to once a year get a full blood panel. The CBC, detective stories, they CBC Chem 7. I don't know what the Chem 7 means, but just a total blood panel, so that And of course, you're going to, within that, get a cholesterol test, which is one of those myths. And that's a whole other podcast episode on how I don't believe that cholesterol is killing all of us. But, and also include, if you can, if there's any reason to, the markers of inflammation and a healthy heart panel. So within a blood test, you might see certain things that would indicate whether you have high sodium or the white blood cells are okay. But, and the healthy heart tests are more common. When I first started ordering them for myself 15 years ago, I had to pay out of pocket because the doctors were like, who is this? But the Cleveland Clinic are the people who started it. So the heart panel will show you what kind of particles your cholesterol is. So it's not just LDL and HDL, but the LDL and the HDL get divided in, they get parsed into like all their different components. We want lots of fluffy particles. We don't want tiny little particles. That test will tell you. Why do you want to know that? Because if you're otherwise healthy, but you have lots of tiny particles in your cholesterol, it's time to do something, whether it's lifestyle change or talking to your doctor about what they would suggest. The other thing especially for women who, but men also, but especially for women over 50 who feel that they are tired all the time, their skin looks terrible, they can't lose weight, they've got a host of symptoms, they've gone to their doctor and said, can you test me for hypothyroidism? The doctor will give them one test, a TSH test, and if they're in the normal range, normal for like the entire planet is a very small range, they'll say like, no, you're fine, go home. Maybe you need to see a psychiatrist. That really is not the best answer for that poor woman. And a TSH, a thyroid panel, which tests independently the T4 and T3, is what you need to know, because TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. It's not a thyroid hormone at all. It comes from the pituitary gland. Actually, I was pointing in the pituitary gland. So it only is an indication of whether the pituitary gland is saying make more or make less TSH. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject. I don't want to get too confusing, but especially if women are struggling, they might have to find a doctor who's going to listen. One of my favorite patient advocates is Mary Shomon, Shomon. She has tons of books, websites, Facebook. She can answer almost any question. I'm sure she's written the answer to every question you might have about thyroid health. So a CBC, total blood panel, a heart health panel, and then thyroid if they're feeling any other issues.
Okay. Speaking of that brought up something I have seen a lot more on TV commercials the last few weeks are it's a company or a guy that they're promoting. If you're over a certain age and you have a certain waist circumference, then you are more likely to be insulin resistant, and that's what's causing the issue. It's a pretty, I guess what concerned me about it is it's such a broad net that they've cast that always makes you concerned about, how accurate something like that can be. But can you speak to that? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Is it like the higher you carry it in your body?
No, this was just basically the commercial says if you're over for a man, if you're over 40 and have a waist circumference of X, maybe over 36 or 40, 42, that you are probably insulin resistant.
Again, it's like so many commercials for health products. They can get away with what they're saying because there isn't as much regulation as there could be. And that person, I've seen that commercial, they are drawing from a pretty big pool of research that indicates that at that point you have insulin resistance, once you have that much fat around your middle. Insulin resistance is if there's too much sugar in the blood, because there's too much sugar going in the form of carbs or actual sugar, you have high blood sugar, right? And in your blood test, you're going to hopefully get an A1C test, number. And that is a measure of 12 weeks. I don't know how this one test can figure out 12 weeks worth of our blood sugar, but it does. And if that number is within a healthy range, that's the good first step. You can also ask for an insulin test that will say you're too high in insulin. But back to the idea of too much sugar in the blood. When the blood sugar goes into the blood cells, insulin comes, when it goes into the blood, insulin comes and as a response and puts it into the cells where the cells can use it for energy. If there's too much sugar in the blood, insulin gets tired knocking on the cell doors, like, I open the door again, and the cell, they're like, I can't. So now there's insulin in places it shouldn't be, too much blood sugar in the blood. And insulin resistance is the phrase insulin resistance is related to the fact that the insulin can no longer clear the blood of the blood sugar. It's supposed to take it and put it into the cells or store it in the liver. Can't do that if it's overwhelmed. So that creates the ultimate inflammatory response. That's why we don't want insulin resistance. Well, we don't want it anyway, because it should be able to put blood sugar where it needs to go, not gumming up the works of our blood.
Right. Yeah, and as a type 2 diabetic, I know that the more weight that I carry, the harder it is to control that blood sugar. And sometimes I can eat right and do the exercising, but if I'm carrying more weight at that particular time, it's just much more difficult to control. So,
the weight becomes an organ. It acts like an organ in the body when there's an accumulation of fat around, the other organs. It starts to put out hormones just like other organs do. It's really crazy.
Oh, I've never heard that.
Yeah. So anyway, you have more now, another system with its own brain kind of thing, sending signals throughout the body, and it just complicates matters.
Right. Interesting.
Cycle.
Yeah. Well, Greg, we've appreciated you taking time out of your day to talk to us. Any other points that you want to make before we wrap this up?
The only thing I would say is, honestly, if you get away from the noise of what the world is saying through commercials, for instance, of take Pepto-Bismol, take, what we talked about before, listen to your body. And even if you don't, Dr. Google is great, but it can make you a little crazy.
Yes,
Find a trusted resource and see if they have information on that, like natural remedies for heartburn, natural remedies for elbow pain. I don't sleep well. What should I take? I have to tell you guys, I'm in my 60s and I sleep like a baby, unless I have something on my mind. But, most nights, but that wasn't always true. I had to really, over the past 10, 15 years, I've had to work at it and I've had to change things, right? I take an herbal supplement before I go to bed. I'm good, right? So just do what you can to see what your body needs so that you can feel good. And you mentioned at the very beginning of your show about wellness lifespan versus wellness span. We want our health span to equal our lifespan. So listen in to you, not necessarily to all the noise out there.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yes.
We are all different individuals with different makeups. And the other thing to talk about doctors, not being hard on them, but if you don't feel like your doctor's giving you the time or telling you what you need to hear, it's always good to get a second opinion, because unfortunately, we've talked on some other shows about, I guess the pattern can be, hey, I have this going on. Okay, great. Here's a pill that'll solve that for you, instead of let's figure out what's causing that to make you not feel good. So just there's a lot of resources out there. Just be sure that we're not getting so focused on one, what one person is saying. If we don't feel like it's correct, get a second opinion. It never hurts.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. All right. Well, what is something that you do in your daily life? It could be professional or personal, but do you have a habit or an app or a tool or something that you do every day that adds a lot of value?
Wow. Do I? I am lucky that I live in a beautiful place, and I would have to say I have nature. And it doesn't matter if it's 22 degrees outside or if it's 102 degrees outside, I have to go outside. And even in the middle of the day, if I'm feeling like blah, whatever, it's not enough to look out the window, I just take a few minutes and I go outside and I look at a tree. I'm going to go pick some daffodils after we get done because they finally started blooming. That is my resource, happy place. Yeah, remedy.
Cool. And that it's funny because we have somebody else.
You have
somebody else chiming
Ada
in
agrees.
there. No, we have a that's what we do. We take a lot of stock in nature, and Terry has been she has her own herd of deer that she nurtures along. And so it's funny, we are like little kids. We wake up in the morning and the first thing we do is we run to the back window to see how many do
a deer count.
Yeah, deer are there. And we had some rain the other day, and so now we've got a flock of ducks that have taken walking up in a
my
little pool of
goodness.
water down there. Yeah, and I guess it was back right before the big cold snap. We had a flock of probably 25 or 30 turkeys,
Oh my
big
gosh.
turkeys
Oh,
that
we
just
have
came out of
turkeys too.
nowhere.
Have
I
you
love them.
you've had turkeys too?
And the guys, when they put out all their feathers and they do the whole
Yes.
little
Yeah.
dance around, and none of the women seem to pay attention. I feel bad for them. They're just
But
eating. That's all they
yeah,
care about.
I see them in the woods and on the road. I may see one or two, but
This
having to
is
see
like,
this many, it was
yeah.
it was kind
That's
of weird.
wild.
Terry's like, what is
What
that
is
bird?
that? It was like flying monkeys from the Wizard of Oz. I'm like, what is that? They were coming down 2 by 2.
They're not graceful when they fly. They
Yeah.
are not
No.
graceful. No.
So anyway, yeah, take the stock in nature. The other thing too, I like to do is to clear my head is, get out and take a little short walk and, just soak it up. Also, I think that one thing it does for us when we take our morning walks is the gratitude just to be able to say,
Absolutely.
look at these beautiful surroundings. I mean, how lucky are we? Even when I have a piece of podcasting equipment that's giving me static, I'm like, it's like it's such a small thing compared to this big, beautiful world that we live in. So I guess just everybody try to look around and be grateful for something today.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. All right. So tell everybody, of course, how can they tell us about the book again? Tell us how they can get it. Tell people how, of course, they can reach out and get a hold of you.
Okay, thank you for asking. My website is rebelliouswellnessover50.com, and on the website you'll find a book page. If you look at the little tabs, it says book, and that'll tell you more about it. And you can download the introduction and the first chapter, which sets up my philosophy, why I wrote the book, and then gives you some things to do actually in the first chapter for those people who don't want a whole book. And the podcast is there too on the website. And as I mentioned, I can certainly send you guys the what tests you need, et cetera, et cetera. And
That'd be
you
great.
can share it with your people. But it will be up on my website again. It's not there right now. I took it down so that I could put my hidden fat loss saboteurs freebie. It's all about the things that disrupt our hormones that are parts of our everyday life that help make it hard for people to lose weight.
Okay, interesting. And you also provide coaching services too. I don't want to
I
leave that
do
out.
provide coaching services. Yes, I do. And it's an individual thing. I do have a lifestyle assessment, which is it's a 1 hour, they answer a questionnaire, and then I give them a response and we talk about next steps. For people that are feeling like they think they could be doing something a little better, they're not sure what it might be. So it's an easy way to get some information without committing to a whole big coaching program if they're not ready for that.
Okay.
And for women and men, not just
It is for women and men. It's a very different thing. And I mostly the business is women over 50, but I have coached men, just a whole different beast. They're like, tell me what to do. I'm going to do that. Women are like, well, last night after I talked to my daughter, it's just funny. But yes, I love men too.
All right, then. Well, thanks so much. That's going to do it for another episode of Educational. I'm Roy.
I'm Terry.
And you can always find us at educational.com. And we are on all the major social media platforms, as well as the video of this interview will go up on YouTube when the episode goes live. So appreciate you reaching out. We're on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. We're not on one that you listen to. Please be sure and reach out. We will be glad to add you. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your family.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you so much. You too.